there is a deeper wisdom to be discerned regarding how this matrix of a world operates. And one of those deeper wisdoms is related to how various spiritual organizations tend to speak about things that the world would normally refer to as doom and gloom. Some people call them doomsday prophecies and things like that. Well, the thing is, when these groups, not all groups, because some of them are just speaking nonsense, but when the genuine spiritual groups start talking about the need to, say, build an underground shelter and store food for 10 to 20 years, it's not what it seems. It's not that that is an actual prophecy, because those things will never happen. What's actually happening here is the Matrix is spinning up events and circumstances and even teachings that are designed to take the students of that teaching through their lower centers all the way through to the other side. And as human beings, the biggest barrier we have, the biggest trauma we hold is fear. And what these organizations are doing is they're not doing it consciously. It's the Matrix working through them. And it's tailored to every individual because the world is holographic. But in essence, what's happening is these events and teachings are pulling people into the fear so that they can go through it and dissolve it and come out on the other side with clarity. And I don't just mean clarity of mind. I mean, they're clearing their chakras. They're clearing the trauma in the chakras. And if you do not dive deeply into the lower centers, especially fear, if all hell does not break loose in your life in a way that forces you to confront the deepest fears, which ultimately the deepest fear ends up being the fear of non-existence. It's not the fear of death. The fear of death can actually be reduced further to the fear of non-existence, but that's for another point. But if you do not dive into the fear fully and completely, then you will never clear the traumas, because the only way out is through, and you must be taken through your literal hell in order to clear it. And that's what's happening. So a lot of people look at these groups and they say, they predicted the end of the world and it didn't happen, and then some of the students, if you will, they call them students, sometimes they call them disciples, whatever. A lot of them leave because they're like, the end of the world never happened. This is totally bogus. If this teacher and these teachings were real, then, this would have happened. And then some people are saying, well, you can't really predict everything because timelines change and blah, blah, blah. No, it's none of that. It's none of that. It's quite literally just designed to take you through the lower centers so that you will purge the trauma and come out on the other side. Now, the people in the group who have already cleared those traumas, they already know because they've been through it. So they listen and they don't say anything. They're not going to say anything. They're not going to say, that's not true. I don't believe in the doomsday stuff. Or, they're not going to say, oh gosh, it might happen. You really should get prepared. They're not going to hold an opinion one way or another because they've already been through it and they know, and they're just waiting. They understand. They see it. Like once you are taken through that fear, there is absolutely nothing that can ever put you in fear again because it's gone. It's dissolved. That chakra is clear. And that's something that a lot of people just don't understand about these various spiritual groups. And, if people decide to leave because these prophecies never happened, then they are not ready to move through the fear. They are not ready to dissolve those traumas. They are not ready for the next step. Because once you dissolve the fear, that's when the real work begins. The real work of the great work does not begin until you dissolve the fear. After the fear, after you clear the fear, after you clear the lower 3 chakras, and technically, I consider the 4th chakra, the heart center, to be one of the lower chakras, because it's actually not really like the other chakras. It's more like a bridge. It's got different qualities, and it transforms energy a lot differently than the other 3, and it stores trauma a lot differently than the lower 3. But it's not a higher chakra. It still stores trauma. It stores trauma in a different way, but it still stores trauma. And once you clear the lower 3 chakras and you start clearing the heart center, things change drastically. I mean drastically. But when you clear the heart center, you don't clear fear until you've cleared the heart center. A lot of people like to say that the solar plexus is pain and suffering, emotional trauma, and then the sacral is more about control and indulgence and power, and the root is about stability and fear. And I mean, depending on which tradition you follow, there's kind of like a mix between that, but the general consensus is that fear resides in the lower 3 chakras. But that's not actually true. It does, but it also resides in the heart center. And until you clear the heart center, you haven't cleared fear. A lot of people don't know that, but that's how it works. You have to clear the heart center to be clear of fear. And once you do that, the whole game changes. And you have to be ready to leave the world behind. And by that, I don't mean leave your body or, be loaded onto a spaceship or, whatever the case may be. That's not what I mean by leave the world behind. I mean, once you clear the heart center, your focus is on God. Your focus is not in the world. And that's a big change. And not everybody's ready for that. So a lot of people, they get stuck when they start being taken through the journey, through their fears, one by one. And they give up because they're following a teacher whose prophecies did not come to pass. And they're short-sighted enough to believe that what's happening in the world is actually real. That the stories and all these things are actually real. These events are really happening. They don't see that it's actually the world taking them on a journey through their own traumas to heal. It's a healing journey. The Ascension process is entirely a healing journey. And it is a journey of removing things from your life, not adding things to your life. It's removing things from your life. And they get discouraged. But that's okay, because they're not ready. And most people would never want to go through it if they knew what it entailed. Because if you start this process, well, you don't really have control over whether it starts or not. It's going to start or not. And you can choose to ignore it and walk away. And it'll slow down and it won't go so fast. But if you choose this journey, there's no getting off the ride. You are strapped in, and the place that all this is going is, well, it's going many places, but along the way, you're going to clear the heart center, and that is going to remove your interest in the world. Genuinely. Not, people who sit there and they say, oh, I strive to be desireless. I have a desire to be desireless. And, that's a desire in itself. You can go into that and get lost in all the intricacies of semantics. But I don't mean people who intentionally say, I am going to give up all of my desires and devote my life to God, because that doesn't work, and that is inauthentic. What I'm talking about is something you can't control. When you clear the heart center, it's not that desire disappears. It's just that the world is not of interest to you anymore. And your focus is all on God. And a lot of people aren't ready for that. But that's what happens when you get rid of the fear. That's what happens when you move out of fear. And so, all these teachers that preach, doomsday, go build a shelter, go stash all this food because we're going to have a nuclear holocaust, or there's going to be some alien invasion, or the world is going to end, or whatever the case may be. They're doing everybody a favor. They're pushing everybody through the fear. And it's up to each individual or not whether they are going to go through it, or if they're going to take it literally and think that the world is actually ending, and then get upset when it doesn't, and then, leave the entire spiritual group behind because, now, of course, when it doesn't happen, they think the leader's a fraud and whatever. There are a lot of fraudulent leaders out there, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to name names. There are a ton of them. And there are a ton of fraudulent leaders who do teach doomsday prophecies. But that's not the point. It doesn't matter, because wherever you're getting your information from, if it is putting you into fear, it is literally just the universe, the world, this matrix, driving you into fear in order for you to conquer your lower self, and nothing more. That's all there is to it.